Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Jay.
I'm Fletcher.
And I'm Abby.
And today's story is about Eli and his sons.
How many?
Well, there's two that are mentioned.
I probably had more, right?
I would guess there'd be more.
Yeah.
Lots of kids in those days.
Yeah. But there's two that we're focusing in on today. And related to our story, we have a question. Question being, tell us about a time when you broke the rules.
Jay's broken a lot of rules, so he's going to go first, I
He's
think.
gonna go first.
Well, see, here's the thing.
We had to tame him in.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of rule breaking that's taken place in my life. Most of it is not fit for this
Not
podcast.
safe. NSF.
That's not safe necessarily,
for
but it's not safe for podcasts. Not fit for podcasts for sure. So interestingly enough, there was a time when our whole family felt like we were breaking the rules, but
Your whole family.
the whole family.
Oh,
But
you're bringing them in.
but we're told we weren't. So we were in Harlem, and we were visiting New York City. We were staying at Michelle's cousin's place in Harlem, and in order to take the subway into Lower Manhattan, the subway station that we went into had no people working, so it's just turnstiles, but there's no fares for kids. Like you don't pay for kids under a certain age, whatever. And all of our children were under that age, and so we asked somebody, we're like, how do they get in if there's no way like to let them through the turnstile? You need to put your card on the thing in order for the turnstile to open up. And they're like, oh, they just go underneath. I'm like, what? Yeah, the kids just go underneath the turnstile.
New York City.
Like, really?
And I think a lot of people also go over the turnstile in New York City.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just thinking, like, there's no people manning the booth or the turnstiles. And so, yeah, it's just, so every time they went under, I'm like, I don't know if this is right or not. This feels wrong, but there's no fare, so there they are.
Wait, did anybody say something?
Nobody ever said anything.
Oh, I was waiting for and then you got caught, and now
Got
it's all
busted.
over.
No. So it's just that it felt like we were breaking the rules, but we weren't.
That's
Somewhere there's a
hilarious.
tab calcing out, and
Probably.
Jay now owes
Next time-
$300 to the New York City
Before I
subway
get
system.
into heaven, you owe $18.58 for each of your children.
Subway fees.
And subway fees.
That's
yeah.
hilarious.
Yep, that's
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 great.
pretty good. That's pretty good.
All right,
I like
Abby.
that. So this is a story about a time when someone thought I was breaking a rule, but I really was doing nothing. And so I was in grade 3. This kind of traumatized me because I never got in trouble in school. And so I was in grade 3 and I was hanging with my friends. And I'm going to be honest, we were the weird kids that pretended we were fairies. I was the wind fairy. My other friend was
Oh,
the
boy.
snow fairy. And the other one was the water fairy. And so we were just playing fairies by the fence. And against the fence, it was somebody's backyard, and it had one of those pool covers rolled up on the thing.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a little puddle of water. So of course the girl that was the water fairy was playing in the little puddle of
Of
water.
She was
course.
in the lawn?
No. This was on the other side of the fence. And we were just sitting there, it was on the fence, and she was just playing with the little water, not breaking anything, just dipping her hand in. And one of the supervisors at recess yells over to, "Why are you guys in there touching their yard? Why are you?" We're like, we're on the opposite side of the fence. We're not doing. She's like, "You guys have to go on the wall right now. What are you doing?" And I'm like, we're not doing anything. You should have just if she had just said, "Guys, get away from the fence," we would have backed off. But no,
Yeah.
just because the girl was touching the fence, we got in a lot of trouble. And
You
she
had to
didn't even
stand
give
against
us a
the wall.
warning. She didn't give us a warning, and I was very upset.
Stand
and so
against the wall. That was the worst punishment.
It was, and it was so ridiculous because we didn't actually do anything wrong.
yeah.
So
I think
that's
I remember.
my story.
I never got in trouble at school, very, very rarely. Did I tell the story of me getting in trouble at school? Maybe I didn't. Oh, sure, I'll tell that one. But no, I went to the wall once, I think, on recess, and
You
it was
spoke English.
No, I didn't. That got you in trouble as well. No. But I remember standing on the wall and like crying to myself because I got in trouble.
Wow.
It was awful. This was like grade 8. No, I'm just joking. One time it was recess and I'm just wandering around, the solo loner kid that I was, walking around finding, something to do at recess.
We were
and I see
really
these
cool
kids in the corner of the yard. I'm like, what are these guys doing? So I walk over to them and of course they're, playing with matches.
Oh.
The very terrible thing that can't do in elementary school.
That's like
and I walk
actually
over
bad.
and I like look and I'm like, I can't really be doing that. So I start kind of walking away slowly. And of course, right at the same time, the teacher comes up.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And I was there and I almost got suspended and I hid the letter from my mom.
Wow.
I didn't get suspended because I'd never gotten in trouble before,
Dang.
but
Right.
Your mom is probably our most active podcast listener, and she's going to hear this.
she
That's right.
she knows the story
Okay, that's good.
because my principal goes, "Oh, did you give your letter to your mom?" And my mom was right there, and I go, it was awful.
Wow. All I know is that you guys and I had very different school experiences.
This was like
I spent a
grade
lot of
4.
time on the wall.
Grade 4.
Yeah.
Jesus turned Jay around.
There is truth to what you speak.
It's funny.
Yeah. And anyways. As always, we want to hear from you. Tell us about a time when you broke the rules. And maybe they're better than ours, because when I think of this, none of us actually broke any rules.
Well, we don't know about yours. Yours is a little sketchy.
No, from these stories. Oh, we don't know
Yeah. We'll look it up later and find out.
There's a possibility that we broke lots of rules, but we were told by somebody that we could do what we were doing, and yeah.
By some stranger in New York?
Yeah,
in
we can
Harlem.
tell you lots of things.
Harlem. I was going to say, I've been to New York and people tell you a lot of things. Some guy tried to sell me a CD for about
Lots
15 minutes.
Yeah,
And
lots that you shouldn't trust. All right, well,
anyway,
let us know about a time that you broke the rules. Let us know on Instagram or send us an email. And of course, as always, we do encourage you to read the stories for yourself in order to get a whole picture of what is going on. And today's story takes place in 1 Samuel. So, of course, last week we talked about the Levite and his porcupine. No, it was the concubine. And at the end that was happening at the end of the book of Judges. And so we're moving forward to 1 Samuel today. And it actually hasn't been all that long since last week's story. Israel is still ruled by judges on and off as the Lord raises them up, and the priests continue to take care of the sacrificial system. And the way that the sacrificial system worked because this is pre-temple, and so there's not kind of this instituted building in place for the sacrifices to take place. If you look at Leviticus, you see that there's actually an outline for all of the different sacrifices that need to be made and what their purposes are. And so as it relates to the law that God gave, people would go and they would offer animals and grain to God. And it was for ways of giving thanks, ways of atoning for sin. There were different types of sin that required different types of sacrifices, and the priest would administer the sacrifices according to the way that the law had lined it out for them or laid it out for them. But this would take place in the tabernacle, which was a tent where God was dwelling with the people. So this was God's presence among his people. And the tent actually followed them through the wilderness, or they carried the tent with them through the wilderness, and wherever they set up camp, the tent would be there, and that was God's dwelling with them. And now that they're in the land, they still have the tent as the dwelling place of God. And this is something we discussed in the Korah episode as well.
all right. So this story, like we said, is basically the same timeline-wise as last week. So it's taking place at the end of the period of the Judges, just before the monarchy gets instituted with Saul. Mm-hmm. And so it takes place roughly in the 11th century BC, 1050 roughly. And so Israel is still having problems with their neighbors. They're constantly going to war, just like you see in the book of Judges. And today they happen to be fighting the Philistines again. And so they get conquered, they get enslaved until God rises up a judge and they get delivered. And so that cycle is just continuing, and we're at the end of that cycle this week.
There we go. So today's story takes place in Shiloh, in the territory of the tribe of Ephraim. Shiloh is one of the military and religious capitals during the time of the Judges, and it also housed the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant during the period of the Judges. So kind of a big deal. It's about 30 kilometers north of Jerusalem in modern-day Israel.
Absolutely. So like Abby said, our story starts in Shiloh, and we're going to meet a man, and his name is Eli. He's the high priest, and he's doing his normal duties. If you remember a couple episodes back, we talked about Aaron. Aaron has all these really, really important duties, and so it's been passed down, and now there's this man, Eli, who is the high priest, and so he's administering sacrifices. And he just happens to have these two sons, and their names were Hophni and Phinehas. And so they start growing up, and like you do, you tell your kids what your profession is, and so Hophni and Phinehas start doing some of the responsibilities that his dad had. So they're butchering some of the animals, they're cooking them, and they're supposed to be doing it in the correct,
Specific way.
very specific way. And again, read Leviticus or if you're in Barrie, talk to Pastor Jen. She loves Leviticus. She'll be happy
She really
to tell you
does.
all about it.
Yep.
Anyway, there's specific ways to kill the animal. There's a specific way to cut up the animal. There's a specific way to cook the animal. And so they have to do this in a very special way in order to be ceremonially
And
clean.
a special way to discard of even.
Of course,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, all that, yeah.
And so Eli and his sons are doing this job. And there's also another guy whose name is Samuel, who we've talked about in the past, but he's been raised in the temple, and Eli is raising him as well. And so Eli and his sons aren't doing the best job. Eli's doing pretty well, but it says that Hophni and Phinehas were worthless men, and they started abusing their power in the tabernacle. So
When
they
the
were
Bible refers to somebody as worthless, it's
big
important
deal.
to maybe not live that way.
right. So if you're looking for examples of how to live, Hophni and Phinehas, not your best examples.
Yeah.
And so they were cutting the meat, and they were cutting off extra sections and putting them in the back
Right.
for themselves, or they were dipping their fork in the sacrifice when they were cooking, and they'd just take a bite.
Right.
And they
Kind
were
of
doing
like
other things.
licking your fingers when you're baking.
not cool, except worse because like it's God's sacrifice,
right.
and you're licking your fingers and taking from God's muffins.
Yeah.
But they were also talking to women who worked at the tabernacle, seducing them and sleeping with them when they shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
That's right in Leviticus, I think. Don't seduce the women at the tabernacle.
Right.
Maybe not. But they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so eventually this man of God comes to Eli, and he says, I have a word from God. And he says, Eli, your sons are doing wrong. You need to stop this. Put a stop to it. And so Eli finds out and goes to his sons and says, listen, if you do wrong to another person, God can still mediate between you.
Yeah.
But if you sin against God, who's there to mediate in between? You need to stop what this you're doing.
Right. Right.
And so Eli tells them to stop, but they don't really listen to him, and he doesn't really put a stop to it. He just more suggests it.
Yeah, and even in his suggestion, he's not telling them, hey guys, you need to be upright people. He's saying like, if you're gonna be, like kind of, he's almost saying like, if you're gonna be a jerk, just be a jerk to people. Don't like you're not gonna you'll get away with it with people, but with God, you're kind of
You're
playing
not-
with
yeah,
fire.
Exactly.
Can see through
And
it.
so they keep doing it, and they keep messing up on their duties, and they keep sinning against God. And constantly, you can see if you read these chapters, it's contrasted with this boy Samuel,
Yeah.
who's growing up in wisdom, and he's growing up in favor with God and man, and says. And so that's the contrast is between Eli's actual sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and the boy Samuel, who's growing up godly. And so, like I said, Eli gets a message from a man of God, and he really gives them this warning and this curse, and it says, God honors those who honor him and despises those who despise him. Because of their actions of disgracing the tabernacle, their family will be cursed. They will die on the same day. His two sons will die on the same day. And he also says in that from that man of God, and God will raise up a new priest who is faithful to him.
Wow.
And so Eli hears this, and he's like, oh, okay, well, that's probably, I should do something about this.
Not an easy word.
But he doesn't. He doesn't
No.
put a stop. It says he loved his kids, or he thought more of his kids than he did of God, and so he kind of ignored it or let it slide. Later on, we get the story of Samuel, and I think we talked about this in our Samuel episode a couple seasons ago. Samuel's just a boy, and he hears from God, Samuel, and he's like, oh, Eli's calling me.
Right.
Anyway, we get that whole story, and eventually Samuel realizes it's from God. He gets a vision. And in this vision, it says that destruction is coming for the family of Eli, for the things that he and his sons have done, even though Eli didn't do anything about them. And so Samuel wakes up and he's like, I don't know if I should tell Eli what I just heard from God. But he does. And what Eli said is, let God do what he will.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what's going through Eli's head. It's like he's let it slide and slide and slide. So maybe he realizes that he's messed up, but he's already old. He's going blind. And he's like, listen, God is going to take care of it.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's a good thing to say, let God do what he will,
right?
Even though it's judgment on him at this point.
Right. But even still, you wonder, had he been corrective, would that have changed the outcome? Mm-hmm. Had he stood up and done the right thing, would that change? I mean, you don't know the outcome yet because we haven't told the rest of the story. But would that have changed what was happening? Like if he pleaded, no, God, please, I've seen the error in my ways. I know the righteous way to respond, and I'm gonna correct. I'm gonna call out my children now that I've been called out. Right.
So yeah, we don't know what would have happened, but we don't do what does happen is Israel goes to war with the Philistines once again, and they're losing really badly, and so they come up with this idea. They're like, okay, why isn't God helping us? You know what we should do? We should take the Ark of the Covenant, right, which is the presence of God, which is supposed to stay in the tabernacle, and they say we're going to bring it before the army, and that's what's going to make us win because God is in our midst. We're going to win. And they used to do this when I think when Moses and Joshua was in charge. Yeah. And it was because God had told them to and had commanded them to do it. And this time they're like, well, let's bring God up front and he's going to take care of us. And so they do it. They go to Shiloh. They get Hophni and Phinehas who carry the ark out right in front of them in battle. And the Philistines are like, man, this is the same God that brought them out of Egypt. This is the same God that has conquered the whole nation. They got scared. Yeah. And so they rallied their troops and actually started fighting against them. And they defeated and conquered the Israelites, even with the Ark of the Covenant there. And the Ark of the Covenant was captured. Hophni and Phinehas are killed, and they are just completely defeated in battle.
Right.
So there's a man who escapes. He comes running. He's covered in dirt, it says. And he arrives in Shiloh, and he's telling everybody what happened, and everybody's crying and wailing on the streets. And then the word gets to Eli, and he hears what happens, that his two sons had died in battle. And then he hears about the Ark of the Covenant and says when he hears that the Ark was lost, he fell off of When he hears the Ark was lost, he falls off his chair, breaks his neck, and dies because he was old and hefty.
What a fall. Yeah.
He was a blind old, I think he was 98 years old at the time. He falls off his chair, breaks his neck because he was such a large man who had been, eaten a little too much of the sacrifice.
Right.
And that ends his 40-year judging of Israel. And so Eli is one of the last judges and priests over Israel before this new order that is coming after the curse of Eli and his family.
Wow. Ooh. You didn't mention Indiana Jones.
I wish I did. So I can do it now. It's still fresh in everybody's mind. When you go watch Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. And there's a scene when they're talking about the history of the Ark of the Covenant, and they show the picture, and it goes, any army that carries this before them cannot be defeated because Hitler wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant and win. Yeah. It's like, listen, read this passage. You don't want the Ark in front of you, because if you're doing it in the wrong way, you're going to get defeated. Yeah. So and Indiana Jones didn't get the Bible quite right.
If they would have actually read the Bible, they would
have known.
Yeah. And they would even see that after the Philistines captured it, it brought nothing but trouble in their own camp as well. Yes, it did. So, what a foolish way to...
And then if you open it, then your face melts.
That's right. And you turn to wax.
That's only in Indiana Jones, though. We can't confirm or deny.
That's right.
You might die if you see the presence of God. I don't know what it looks like.
Right.
Nor do I want to, because... I want my face to melt.
That's right.
Anyway, let's move into the questions. Of course, the theme for this season is where do we see people called out, and that's judgment and justice and forgiveness and mercy.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think we see I think we see mercy in the warnings that were given along the way, and like I said, that even if Eli would have, instead of saying, let God do what he would do, which sounds, you read that and you're like, oh, that sounds like a righteous response, like God's in control or whatever. But had he actually taken that as an opportunity to correct, to even take ownership for his own junk and repent and correct his sons, then I think we would have seen some mercy. I think we might have seen God behave differently than what we see actually playing out.
We definitely see the judgment. It's delayed. You see Eli getting visited by the man of God.
Yeah.
You see it in Samuel's vision. It's 2 or 3 warnings of, listen, Eli, you know what's going on. All you have to do is end it. And so Eli got this kind of laziness almost of,
Right.
yeah, okay, maybe, I don't know. And so he didn't, in the end, turn towards God. And so that's why eventually everybody is judged, right? And so Eli, he was warned. And so that's the mercy, is that we have options. We have chance after chance after chance after chance.
And I think we have examples too. I think Samuel throughout the story serves as an example, which is a warning as well, we see the way that he actually conducts himself, and he grew in stature and wisdom.
Yeah, in favor with God.
God, as he was growing up, and Eli and his sons see him growing up, and they think, they could have been like, oh, this is actually the way that we're called to live, and we're not doing that. So I see that as a warning as well.
I really like the idea, because in Eli's vision, and in the message from the man of God, it's like, and I will raise up a new leader for Israel. And so God's, even though their leadership is constantly failing, the judges mess up, Moses even messes up, Aaron messes up, everybody messes up eventually, but God is constantly renewing and anointing somebody else for that role of leadership. He's not abandoning Israel and saying, you're on your own, this is enough, I've had enough of you. You sinners and you wicked people, because they've done terrible things. Even right in last week's episode, easily I could see, I'm burning it all down. This is what they've become. But again, over and over again, he lifts up these leaders, and in this case, it's Samuel, who will follow him and turn the nation back towards God.
There you go. So I guess that leads to our final question then. So how does this story lead to the rest of the fulfilling of the story of God throughout the Bible?
As we talked about kind of some of these parallels, I think we see parallels that follow through, and we see then in Jesus's life as well. And you have one to talk about. Just before you get to that, I wanted to say, we see the way that Samuel conducts himself as being different than the way that the religious leaders are conducting themselves. And then we see that in Jesus as well. As he comes in, he actually lives much differently than the religious leaders of his day, and puts on display for the religious leaders the way that God has actually called those who lead his people to live, and that's with love and grace, and putting the heart before the law, actually, which is much different than the way the religious leaders were. It was all about, like, just observe the law and do that at all costs, even, which, and Jesus is like, oh no, there's the law, here's the law, but here's actually what the heart of the law is, and it comes out in the way that you live more than the rules that you follow or break.
Going on the heart of the law idea, it's Jesus came and he's showing the heart of the law. And then you look at Samuel, who I'm trying to point as the example of what Christ would be, is Samuel in his prophecy of it would be a person that would bring the hearts of people back towards God.
Right.
And so not just the law. Samuel is the leader that was risen up to turn the people back towards God, turn their hearts towards God, not just the legalistic ideas. And so there's actually a parallel verse in Samuel and in the Gospel of Luke, one talking about Samuel and one talking about Jesus, and it's Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man, Luke 2:52, and then in Samuel it's the same thing. And Samuel grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man, and so Samuel is this example of a man who will follow God, or man who would turn the people back towards God, and so Jesus is the fulfillment of the ultimate
Yeah.
version of that, turning people back towards God.
Yeah.
And so we see Jesus in the person of Samuel to come. Yeah.
There we go. Well, I guess that's everything for today.
Thank you so much for listening.
Bye for now.